Hi, thank you for joining me today. It's Geraldine from the Paper Puffin Studio, and today I'm going to show you how to make these tiny lantern boxes. You can use these to hang on your Christmas tree. You can place a tiny plastic tea light inside, or you can see from this one that I made that you can also fill it with little chocolates. I hope you enjoy this video. If you do, please remember to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Now let's get started. Let's begin by reviewing all of the pieces that you're going to need to build this lantern box. You're going to need a piece of your base color measuring 6 inches by 8.5 inches, and another piece of that same base color measuring 1/2 inch by 7 inches. To make the bow, you're going to need a piece of coordinating cardstock or designer series paper measuring 1 inch by 7 inches, and another tiny piece measuring 1/4 inch by 1 inch. You'll also need a piece of scrap paper on which to stamp the sentiment. I went ahead and die cut out these 2 pieces of the pine boughs, and I have 4 pieces of window sheet ready. These 4 pieces each measure 1 3/4 inches by 2.5 inches. Now we're ready to do some scoring. So taking my large piece of my base color and with the 8.5 inch edge pushed up against the top of my trimmer, I'm going to be scoring it at 2 inches, 4 inches, 6 inches, and again at 8 inches. Now I'm going to turn my paper so that the 6 inch edge is along the top of my trimmer, and I'm going to be scoring this first at the 1/4 inch mark. So that I have enough paper to hold on to when I do that score line, I'm going to be using my guide on the right hand side. So lining it up at 1/4 inch, I'm going to go ahead and score that portion. I then need to slide it over to 7/8 inch, and I'm going to continue using the right side of my trimmer to line it up at 7/8 inch. And I'll go ahead and score there. Now I need to do another score, so I'm going to be flipping my paper around this time, and now I'm going to line it up so that I'm making a score at 1.5 inches. And then my last score line is going to be at 4.25 inches. So now I've got all the scoring done. We're now ready to start folding, burnishing the paper. Now I'm going to bring in my envelope punch board to help me punch some holes in the paper. So with the paper that I've scored and also folded and burnished along the vertical score lines, I'm going to be turning the paper in this direction. I have a score line along this edge, and I'm going to be folding that piece under. I'm going to use the 7/8 inch score line mark as my guide, and I'm going to line this up inside here in the center. I'll go ahead and do that and punch, and you'll see that this is what I have. Now I'm going to fold again and repeat. Again, I'm using that 7/8 inch score line, and I'll continue right along the paper to make that hole. And when I get to the end, I'll do one here. So I'll tuck it under, like so. So this is the profile of the paper. Now when this all goes together, you'll see that it will go together like this. But before we do that, we need to cut out the oval shapes for these center panels. Now using this oval die, which measures 2 inches in length and 1 inch in diameter, I'm going to be taking my paper, turning it in this direction so it will fit through my cutting and embossing machine, and I'll fold over 2 panels. I'll place my die here in the center and run it through the machine. After I've done that, I'll turn my paper around, fold it over again, place the die in the center, and run it through the machine. I'll go ahead and do that and we'll pick up there. With all of the die cuts done, I'm now ready to fold and burnish along all of the remaining score lines. So I'm going to start here at this bottom score line, and I'm going to fold the paper in a mountain. I then am going to do the same thing with the score line just above the oval. So I'm going to fold it as a mountain. This next score line at the 7/8 inch mark will be folded as a valley. And then finally, the little 1/4 inch will get folded as a mountain. Now I'm going to take out my Tombow glue, and I'm going to place a tiny bead of Tombow glue along this upper edge so that when I fold it over, it will glue together. So I'll go ahead and do that and speed that up for you. The next step will involve attaching the window sheet over the ovals. So each window sheet will get glued in place right here. And I'm going to be using glue dots. So how I do that is I take my roll of glue dots and then I just place a glue dot in each one of the corners of the window sheet, like this. And then I place the window sheet over the oval. I'll go ahead and do that for each one of these spaces and we'll pick up there. With all of the window sheets now in place, I'm ready to do some cutting. So I'm going to go ahead and cut up from the bottom to the first horizontal score line, and using a little miter cut, I'll cut away this tiny little piece. Then I'll cut up the remaining of these score lines to that horizontal line. So the box will go together nicely. I'm going to miter this flap and this flap. So I'll move this one and this one up out of the way. I then will just trim off the edge on each one of these flaps at a slight angle. And you can see that this is what the lantern looks like. Now the next step is to assemble the lantern. So I'm going to be folding this portion over, and I'm going to place Tombow glue here and along here so that I can assemble the box. Then I'll just fold this piece over to meet the glue, and I'll hold it in place until it's glued properly. Now with the seam at the back, I'm going to turn so that I'm now going to be folding in these flaps. So I'm going to fold in these two, place glue on those. Then I'll remember where the front of the box is. That will be the last flap that I will glue down. I'll go ahead and do that, and we'll speed that portion up. Now you'll see that when you push down on the lantern, it takes that lantern type shape on the top. And so now I'm ready to put the handle of the lantern in place. So here's the strip that we cut earlier. I'm going to be using glue dots again. I'll pick up a glue dot for this end of the handle, and then for this end of the handle. And I'll go ahead and glue the handle in place, keeping in mind that the seam is at the back of the box. So I want the handle to go about here in the middle on the side. Then I'll turn, and then I'll place the other one in the middle on the opposite side. So now I have this. At this point, I'm ready to make the bow. Now to make the bow, I'm taking the piece of coordinating cardstock that we cut earlier. That was 1 inch by 7 inches, and I'm using my envelope punch board again. I'm going to be placing it into my envelope punch board, lining it up at the 1/2 inch mark and punching. I'm then going to flip it around and do that exact same thing again. So lining it up at 1/2 inch and punch. I'm going to slide it over to 3.5 inches, punch, then flip it and punch again at 3.5. Then I'm going to turn my paper around, and I'm going to line it up at 1/2 inch, punch, and then flip it again at 1/2 inch. So this is what it looks like. Now the next step is to make a cut on either end of the paper. So I'm going to be placing this into my envelope punch board, and you'll see the little arrow is lined up just on the outside of the paper. I'll punch, then I'll flip it around and do the exact same thing again. This allows me to have a little decorative edge on the end of the bow. Now, using my bone folder, I'm going to help the paper to curl so that the bow takes on a nice 3-dimensional shape. And I'll do that by just moving the bone folder along the paper on the inside portion of the bow. I'm going to be then folding the bow together so that this portion and this portion get attached into the middle of the bow right here and here. And I'll do that by placing a glue dot in the center right here and then attaching these pieces as I fold them in. I've got the glue dot in place, so now I'm going to fold in on each side of the bow. Then when I turn it around, you can see I have the bow. Now to help it, I'm going to just curve this portion a little bit and curve this portion a little bit. And then I'm going to cut out a piece that's going to be a tiny little piece to go along the center here. The piece I'll cut will be 1/4 inch by 1 inch. I've got the glue dot in place, so now I'm going to fold in on each side of the bow. Then when I turn it around, you can see I have the bow. Now to help it, I'm going to just curve this portion a little bit and curve this portion a little bit. And then I'm going to cut out a piece that's going to be a tiny little piece to go along the center here. The piece I'll cut will be 1/4 of an inch by an inch. Now I've assembled the bow. I folded the tiny piece of paper around the center, and now I'm going to embellish it a little bit with these pieces. I'll go ahead and do that and pick up there. I've embellished the bow a little. I've placed a little rhinestone in the center and attached these pieces of greenery. Now this is going to get attached to the front of the lantern right here above the oval. I'll go ahead and glue that on, and then I'll prepare the sentiment for the front. Here's the finished project. I went ahead and used the Happy Christmas sentiment from the Warm Hugs stamp set and used my classic label punch to punch it out. I then attached it to the front using some glue dots. Now you can use these lanterns to fill them with some candies. So for this one, I filled it with some truffles. And then for this one, I put a little lantern inside, a little plastic tea light. And you can hang these on your Christmas tree. I hope you've enjoyed this project. If you have, please remember to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. See you next time.